Though I don't go on many trips out of town, this was one of the few times I had to stay somewhere other than a friend or family's house. The area I needed to stay in was fairly small, and most of the hotels around there were not very nice. To my surprise, there was a single home listed on Airbnb. This was my first time using the site, but the house looked like a decent place, much better than the hotels around that area. I requested the dates I'd be staying, and within a few minutes, the place was booked. I started the drive a bit later and arrived in town, which was about 14 hours away from my city, well into the nighttime. The town looked almost deserted compared to where I was used to living. All the houses' lights were off, and all the stores were closed. No people or cars were out either. Of course, it was the middle of the night, so I didn't expect this small town to be lit up and bustling with activity or anything, but it was still a bit eerie. I hadn't seen it during the day, so this was my eerie first impression of the community. The street that took me to the Airbnb was pitch black, with no street lights to speak of. It led through a winding, forested neighborhood until I eventually ended up at the home. It was one of the few houses that had its porch and outdoor lights on. One window upstairs also had a light coming through it. I figured the last customer must have just made the mistake of leaving it on, so I didn't think anything of it. I started getting my stuff up to the front door, got the key code from my email, and opened the door, locking it behind me. I quickly put my stuff in the corner of the room and then went upstairs to turn off the light that had been left on. It seemed to be one of the spare bedrooms, only having a bed and a small dresser inside. I flicked the light off and then went to the main bedroom to set up my things for the stay. I was only staying for one night, but I had it booked for 2 because I needed to be there late into the following day. I was up for no more than an hour before finally getting into bed and turning in for the night. I rested my eyes and tried to sleep, but I was stuck lying awake for a long time. I sat up quickly, hearing a thud through the walls of the house. I stared at the door, trying to think of what that could have been. No ideas came to mind. I got up to check what had made that noise. I opened the door softly, peering into the upstairs hallway. It was dark and quiet, no more thuds, only the sounds of the house creaking in the wind. I stepped back and quietly shut the door, but a strange feeling came over me. I waited and listened in. I thought more about that sound I had heard. As I stood there listening, soft creaks started to echo along the floorboards from another room. I pressed my ear up against the door as the creaking moved into the hallway, then began making its way toward my door. I was in so much shock that I almost didn't realize it had to be the footsteps of someone approaching. My heart started racing as they came right up to the other side of where I was. I put my hand tightly on the door handle to keep it from budging. Only a moment later, I felt someone pull it down from the other side. As soon as I resisted, they eased off immediately. There was a small moment of silence before suddenly the handle was forced down and they slammed into the door. It swung halfway open before I pressed my body back into it. I only saw half of their face in the doorway, but I could see anger in their eyes that I didn't expect to ever see in my entire lifetime. After a brief struggle, I somehow managed to push the door back into the latch and lock it. The man on the other side tried to get it back open, but after yelling several unpleasant words toward me, he ran downstairs and out of the home. I was still catching my breath, my mind racing, but I gathered myself up and dialed 911. For such a small community, they actually came very quickly. The owner of the Airbnb continued to look into the case after I left the following day. I wish I had kept up with it to see what happened. The man seemed so desperate to get into my room. He was in a state of real rage, as if he wanted to hurt me. It was almost like I'd done something personally to him. Everything about it is disturbing, and I don't think I'll ever get it out of my head. Airbnbs probably won't be something I'll take part in again for a long time. It was the fall of 2018 when this happened to me. I was 22, and at the time, I was living temporarily on the East Coast, right outside of the Appalachian mountain range. I'll go ahead and admit right now that I've never been too much of an outdoorsy person. I hadn't had any experience in camping, nor was I really interested in those sorts of activities anyway. However, this was my last year living in probably the best place to do all those outdoor things. Plus, with it being mid-fall, the environment looking so pretty and the weather being so nice, I figured this was my one chance to try it out. Now, I didn't want to go on a huge camping adventure or anything. I simply found a simple hiking trail instead. It had some good views of the mountains, and I prepped a small backpack with some water, snacks, and a first aid kit. No cars were there when I arrived. It was just a small dirt parking area, really, so I guess this wasn't a popular trail, at least not as much as I thought it was. I parked and started walking down it. It was pretty calm, and it definitely didn't feel like a path a lot of people would take. It didn't have any noticeable recent shoe prints in the dirt, and it was a fairly small path. There were trees on either side obscuring vision a bit. As I got further in, the entire path became more densely covered in trees, enough to even blot out the sun and make the whole trail look quite dark. It was actually pretty nice and cooling, but not hearing or seeing anyone else became a bit more unsettling the further out I got, not exactly in a creepy way, but in an I'm all alone out here way. It wasn't something I was used to, not being around any other people. About an hour or maybe even 2 hours down the trail, I was caught off guard by suddenly seeing a man up ahead of me. He was just sitting on the side of the path, looking like he was taking a break underneath a tree. As I passed him by, I gave him a friendly nod and said hello. He looked up at me but didn't say anything. He didn't smile or nod either, he just looked at me for a few seconds, and I looked away. I wasn't sure what to make of that behavior. Maybe he didn't hear me, or maybe I'd caught him off guard as well. The strange look without even a slight smile, though, was not giving me a good feeling. I walked a bit faster for the next part of the trail, hoping to put some distance between us. After an hour, I slowed down and made it to the end, which was an overlook of the mountains. The fall colors on the trees made the view way better than it would have been at any other time of the year. Overall, I was glad to have made the hike. I stared off into the distance for a few minutes, enjoying a view I would probably never get to see again. When I turned around, though, my heart just about leapt out of my body. I saw the man from earlier standing right at the end of the trail. He was about 10 feet from me. I'd never even heard him walking behind me. After the initial scare, I realized how creepy it was that he was just standing there, blocking the path, not coming out to look out the overlook like a normal person would be doing. He then did something even more odd. His face shifted as he gave a strained smile. "How's the view?" he asked. "Yeah, it's really nice. You should take a look too." I tried to be polite, but I was still more confused than anything. The man stepped closer, then pointed to my right. "There's an even better view down that trail if you want to see." I looked over my shoulder to where he was pointing. There was a path that was barely visible going through a patch of dense trees. It was rugged and undefined, not something that looked to be used very often. The man walked up to where the path started and stood at the entrance, telling me again about how great the view I would experience was, and saying it was just a minute or two walk into the woods to get there. I tried to decline, but he continued to insist how great it was. It became obvious he had other intentions than just wanting me to go there and see a nice view. I said I had to go home now and started to walk toward the main trail. The man was quick to move his body to block it once more. I stopped in place, now even more terrified. I was thinking of the possible intentions of this man. He was just a few feet away from me, and we were stuck in the middle of an empty forest. The man looked at me with a 1,000-yard stare. I took a few steps, walking around him and hoping he would not escalate the situation. For some miraculous reason, he didn't. The man simply let me go, and I made my way around him back down the trail. Every time I looked back at him, he was watching me, not even trying to be discreet. Thankfully, he made no attempt to follow me. I made it back to my car just fine in the end. I don't know what that man was trying to do, but surely nothing good was down that path, likely just a dead end somewhere for him to lead me before either killing me or doing something even worse. Whatever horrible thing he had in mind, I don't know why he didn't try to stop me from leaving either. We were all alone there. Maybe he was worried about doing something on a main trail. All I can say is I'm lucky to have gotten out before he did something horrible to me. I was working at a chain hotel off the interstate. I won't say which hotel, but it was a major brand. I was training a coworker for the night audit shift. She and I are both female and in our mid-20s. Around 3 a.m., after all the paperwork for the day was done, I decided to show her the different room types, starting with the largest suite up on the 3rd floor. Upon arriving on the 3rd floor, we got off the elevator and started walking down the hall. We noticed a man who was sweating profusely just standing in the doorway of his room. He definitely seemed intoxicated at the very least. We walked by, greeting him as one does, and got no response at all. All of a sudden, I felt a fear that was really palpable. We got to the suite I was showing her, and as soon as the door shut behind us, I told her that guy was giving me a real weird vibe. I didn't think we should walk past him again to get back to the elevator. I suggested we instead continue down the hall to the stairs. As soon as we exited the room, we immediately noticed that not only was the man not back in his room, he was facing us and watching us. I whispered to her, "Take off your shoes. We're going to run down the stairs and out to the parking lot, okay?" She agreed, and we took our shoes off at the top of the stairwell. We bolted down the steps and out into the lot. We entered back into the building through a different entrance and ran to the office to check the cameras. Sure enough, the man had chased down the steps after us and was now looking for us in the hallway and by the door to the parking area. We checked the reservation tied to the room number so I could inform my manager and tell them to place this person on the do not rent list. All I remember was that his name was something extraordinarily normal, so forgettable, it may as well have just been John Smith or something. Jump forward to late 2021. I turn on the local news and see the very same man who chased us down the steps that night. His name was Anthony Robinson, now dubbed the shopping cart killer. He killed 2 women in Harrisonburg and 2 more that we know of in northern VA. He was known to utilize hotels to meet and then victimize women he was communicating with online, though I suppose he was not adverse to trying crimes of opportunity as well. That was my only close encounter and definitely very scary in hindsight. I was driving on the empty highway, fighting to keep my eyes open. It was well past 1 a.m., and I couldn't help but look at the GPS every few seconds, hoping the estimated arrival time would somehow go down faster. I'd been on the road for a dangerous 15 hours straight, only stopping for food and gas on the way to my new home. I'd been forced to move for work, yet funnily enough, it was work that never let me make a trip to see the place I'd be moving to. Finally, though, I made it to the highway exit and into the town I'd be living in from then on. It was dark, so it wasn't exactly easy to see what everything looked like, but I could see enough to tell it wasn't as good as where I'd lived before. Most of the buildings looked like locally owned and run shops that were far from what I was used to. Along with that, most of the lights were off as well. When I got to my neighborhood, though, it didn't seem all that bad. The houses seemed pretty regular, sectioned close to each other, and I pulled up to my house and parked on the side of the road. I got out to see the place I'd be calling home for the next year. From the outside, it looked just like all the others, but what really mattered was the inside. I walked up the driveway and pulled out the key I'd been sent a few days ago. I put it in the lock and turned it, but there was no click. I grabbed the handle and pressed on the door, watching it glide open. It was already unlocked. I quickly went in and looked around to make sure my things were there. The movers had dropped off everything in the morning, so I didn't want anything to have been stolen. After a quick look around, nothing seemed to be missing. It was likely the movers had simply forgotten to lock the place up after leaving. Something was still giving me a bad feeling, though. On top of all that, the lights and electricity didn't seem to be working. I knew I was supposed to set it up in town at some point. It was obviously too late to do that tonight, though I didn't think they would just cut the power on my first day there. I turned my phone light on and started looking through the rooms. The downstairs was pretty okay standard looking with a slightly older feel to it. I made my way up to the second floor. At the top of the stairs was a long hallway with 5 doors. I stepped into each of the rooms one by one, shining my phone light around. They were all very small, and a lot of them had water damage on the ceilings and walls. When I opened the door to the master bedroom, I was surprised to see a single tarp laying on the floor. It looked dirty, maybe like something the movers had used to wrap furniture with. What made it so odd, though, was that there was nothing at all upstairs aside from that tarp. All the furniture and boxes were downstairs. I took a step back and closed the door. I was already so tired I just wanted this night to be over with. I didn't really want to crowd my mind with the uncertainties of moving here. I went back downstairs and sat on one of the sofa chairs that was still wrapped up in plastic. I tried to rest my eyes. My eyes jolted open, though, as a sudden thud echoed throughout the home from above me. I honestly didn't even know if I'd fallen asleep or not. All I remembered was sitting down and closing my eyes for a moment. The sound was quite harsh, not just some small bump in the night. I stood up and went to the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the dark hallway of that house. It was so silent and eerie. I must have stood there for a whole minute before taking my phone out and turning on the flashlight. I slowly walked up the creaky stairs, and when I got to the top of the steps, I shined the light down the hallway. I immediately noticed the door at the far end was slightly open, and there was an unmistakable outline of a figure standing between the crack in the doorway. They were looking right at me. I almost fell backwards down the steps. My immediate reaction was to turn and run. I sprinted for the front door and straight out into the driveway and into my car. I thought about driving away, but knowing literally all of my belongings were inside that house, I wanted to make sure whoever was in there didn't just snatch up everything. I called 911 and waited for their arrival on the side of the road. During the whole 5 minutes it took them to get there, I never saw any movement in the windows nor anyone leaving the front door. When the police searched the house, though, the back door was wide open. It was obvious to them that whoever that was had been living inside the house for quite a while, probably because it had been vacant over the past couple of months. At first, I thought they were talking about the attic, since I had lived through all the rooms and saw nothing but a tarp. But there was no attic. They were talking about the master bedroom. That meant that when I was looking around upstairs that night and I opened the door to that room, that person was hiding somewhere in there, probably right behind the door itself. If I'd gone in any further inside the room to investigate the tarp and look around, there's a chance they might have done something to stop me. When I was about 6 years old, in kindergarten or first grade, I can't exactly remember which, we lived right across the street from my school. And I mean right across the street from our front room window. The school property was the majority of what could be seen. I went to this school until my second grade year, when the school was shut down by the district and the kids were shipped off to whatever school happened to be closest to them. The abandoned property became a community center of sorts for the town. By the way, less than 200 people lived here. I won't name drop the town, but I will say it's somewhere in rural Illinois. The estimated 200-person figure was in 1989, and there are considerably fewer people now. Most of the population eventually moved away or died, and several of the houses have burned down. Today, the town is even more dried up than it was during my kindergarten years, and the last time I visited, it looked as though nature was in the process of reclaiming it. I say all of this because it's important you understand just how small this town was. People didn't just randomly show up there. Strangers would be immediately recognized. There was nowhere for them to hide because the town only had 3 streets. All but the end of one of them led out of town, and the lone end of the lone street that didn't offer an escape route led right to a dead end with an ancient cemetery. The town had nothing but a post office, a couple of abandoned buildings that I'm certain used to be general stores, and a single payphone. Today, the post office has closed down and the payphone is gone. Keep all this in mind when I say that a stranger or creep would have been noticed immediately. It's surprising to note, then, that I was almost abducted by a stranger in that very same town from directly in front of the school. In fact, actually, I was abducted. That's the strangest thing. I remember when I left school that day, there was a man standing in front of a vehicle, and he greeted me directly by name. The man knew my name, and he told me my mom had sent him to pick me up for some reason or another. The memory of what he actually said is a bit hazy, but it amounted to something like, "Your mom isn't at home, so she sent me to pick you up and take you to where she is. Get in, and we'll go for a ride." You know, the usual creeper thing. And I did. There are certain details I don't remember from this point. Why didn't I just look across the street to see if my mom's car was in our driveway? Maybe I did. Where did we go? I can't remember. What happened? I can't remember much of that either. I only have the briefest of memories of me sitting in the passenger seat of his vehicle, saying something as we drove out of town. I can't remember what he said. I can't even remember what he looked like. There's just a large chunk of my memory that's blocked out. Maybe he took me somewhere and did something to me, and I just locked it up inside. I sure hope not. I hope he was some aspiring napper with a conscience who couldn't accept the enormity of the sin he was about to commit, because eventually he just took me back home. I hope that nothing bad happened to me, and that my lack of memory is more due to the entire sequence of events being so uneventful that my developing little brain felt no need to keep it in storage. Apparently, I told her what happened because she told me how she went over to the school and began freaking out about it. That's all I have to prove to myself it even happened. Up until then, I had wondered if I just imagined the whole thing. Who was the man? How did he know my name? Why did he take me? And most importantly, why did he just bring me back? What even happened that day that I can't remember? It might not be the most traditionally scary story, but knowing there was a real monster who almost gobbled me up when I was 6 years old and lost his appetite for some reason is more horrifying than I can even imagine.